So this actually is really interesting, right? Let's get in trouble. Let's jump right in and get in trouble. Where's this tweet? Here we go.
Oh yeah.
So I have this tweet from JAMA. Are you familiar with JAMA?
I am not.
So JAMA Network is NewsGuard certified. So NewsGuard says that it is a website for 13 medical journals published by the American Medical Association. They consider it to be overwhelmingly credible with a 92.5 out of 100. And they say, racial ethnic variation in nasal gene expression of transmembrane serine protease 2. The tweet they put out says that given the essential role of TMPRSS2 in SARS-CoV-2 entry, higher nasal expression of TMPRSS2 may contribute to the higher burden of COVID-19 among black individuals. The first reply, race is not genetic. Do better. Well, what do you mean do better? It's a scientific study. How do you do
How
better
is it not
science?
genetic?
Well,
Yeah. I mean, there was a study that's done where you get individuals and they give you their self-identified race, and then they look at their genes and they look at how they cluster based on self-identified race.
interesting.
And they all cluster basically in the exact same groups that you would think. So it's a very low resolution depiction of what these are general racial categories, like white, African American. It's a super low resolution. If you turn up the sensitivity high enough, you can see these things kind of come out in sort of a clustered fashion genetically. And they do give some useful information. So I don't think we should be using the generic racial categories. There's much more easily finer scale variation that you can pick up that might have relevance in the medical field, like only certain populations of black individuals have sickle cell anemia. It's like some sub-Saharan Africa populations have these. But to say, I mean, they're saying race is not genetic, but their idea of race is sort of this socially constructed version. But that's not to say that human variation isn't genetic. I mean, human variation is by definition genetic.
I mean, what do they mean by race in this regard? That it's not genetic.
Well, they would say the categories that we call these races were constructed by white, Western, heterosexual individuals.
They were definitions and observations were made typically in science as we know it from many white individuals. We also collaborate with other countries. I mean, India and Japan, for instance, contribute to a lot of major scientific breakthroughs and studies, as do a lot of other countries. We don't just assume that, they make the assumption that white people have invented everything.
Well, they would say that because there's not like any single criteria that defines one race from another, you can't boil it down to a single tiny one thing that makes somebody black or one thing that makes somebody this.
Right.
Therefore, these categories don't exist. But that's ignoring a whole type of thing called polyphyletic categories, where you can belong to like a certain group that's sort of it's a cluster concept. It can have various characters that co-vary in a non-random way, and you can measure this statistically, even though it's not. You can't say that these are super distinct categories in any one way, but there are ways to cluster them.
Yeah. It is interesting because people often reference, say, like albino black people, and they'll say you can still tell that they're, facial, the size of the nose or whatever. You can make determinations on that they're albino or black or something like that. But it actually is a really good point to give credit where credit is due to the left when they say that that's a really good example of the left's argument, that there are individuals who have white skin but have more similar facial formations to your typical black or Latino or Asian person, and that person might identify as one of those, not as white, even though they have white skin. Mm-hmm. And you end up with really weird things from this argument, though. You end up with white people with black hair saying they're black and getting away with it, like this professor who's apparently Jewish. And so it is interesting, though, and I've often thought about this. How do you define what makes someone black or not, right? So we kind of were critical of the idea of the capital B black, the political black, but there are challenges. There are some people you might look at and say this person has white skin, but they identify as black and they have black parents and there's some pigmentation issue, maybe albinism, and so they end up with whiter skin. I guess the issue I see is the challenge in navigating the space appropriately and properly to make sure that we're being correct, we're being respectful, correct first and foremost, but we do want to make sure we're treating people like human beings. The challenge there opens the door for a more extreme version of there's no race is not genetic in any capacity and stuff like that. And then this just basically starts to expand from there. And it's almost like science isn't perfect. So they found a hole, or they found a thread, and they're pulling and unraveling the whole sweater based off of one small thread where they find an error. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like because you can't identify one thing that makes someone definitively black or definitively Asian. And they're, again, ignoring the statistical things that we do, and we're correlating different, single nucleotide polymorphisms in populations. I mean, we can get down to such fine-scale population differences. If you look in India, you can actually look at the way that the population is structured based on the caste system that they had for long periods of time, where you had more likely to have breeding within caste than between them. This creates certain genetic structures between certain populations.
That makes sense.
That can be measured. Like, that's what we're talking about. That's a much more recent effect, but you can still say that those are real. It's not like a person from this one caste is completely different than this other. They're not like different species.
Yeah.
But you can still look at these correlational differences between their genetic structure. You can say you are most likely from Brahmin caste or something.
Right.
And
well, I mean,
this is something that human population geneticists have no problem talking about with other geneticists. But if you were to say that this corresponds to anything real to the social justice,
well, I got my not me, but members of my family have gotten their ancestry or whatever, and it comes back and it says, here are all the things you are. Like, how can they tell you that if it wasn't really genetic or whatever?
Maybe there's something to this whole genetics thing.
Yeah. But I guess it's racist, bigoted. I wonder what's your. Let's do this. Let's take everything we've talked about just now. Fast forward 10 years.
Oh my God.
Assuming this keeps going, what would you predict?
I would expect, if it keeps going at the same clip, I don't think it can. So if it keeps going at this clip, I think it's going to max out, and there's either going to be some sort of revolution, or no one's going to know up from down or left from right, because it's just going to be, everything's been deconstructed.
I like to imagine that everybody has to wear a giant cardboard box around their body that they move around. It's not it's like dragging on the ground too. And they speak through a text-to-speech so that no one knows anyone's gender or race or whatever. And in order to communicate, you type in the keyboard I am hungry and would like to get a cheeseburger, and it would be like, I am hungry, would like to eat cheeseburger.
That would be too colorblind though, because that's racist.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So then there would be,
you need to take into their accounts. You need to have a checklist or something outside of
No. The Asian people would have everyone's skin tone would be the color of their box, but you couldn't see anything else. Is it? Can you be gender blind? Is that also bigoted?
I think it probably is.
There's no answer.
I'm gonna go with yes on this one.
Okay, how about everybody's wearing a gray jumpsuit? They have shaved heads, and if you're a dude, they malnourish you to a certain degree. So everybody will be basically the same height and weight, and they'll hold hands.
Yeah, I didn't think we could get to where we are right now, so that's not too far-fetched.
Honestly, I think to be more realistic and put the jokes aside, I think the reality is a right-wing reaction. I think that the more psychotic this stuff becomes, there's whether the left wants to admit it or not, people have certain biological drives, and they're going to want these things, like eating food. We all crave food or we die, and you can't just act like these things don't exist. And people want to have families. It's interesting. I was looking at a study a while ago. And it was, what do you think most people value, and what do you value the most? And most people said other people want to be famous. They said, what do you value? Family. Everybody said they valued family, but everyone else valued fame. It's a really interesting phenomena. If that's the case, then you have most people just want to have a family. Well, if you say you want to disrupt the nuclear family, like Black Lives Matter does, eventually you're going to have regular people saying, I want a family. They're going to look to their left, and they're going to see people saying, break the family apart. They're going to look to their right, and they're going to see people with the smiling family and a picket fence, and they're going to be like, I'll take that. What they don't realize is they're looking at, fascists. And they're going to say, I want this one thing. And I bring that up almost as a bit of a self-criticism, because here we are. You mentioned earlier you were not for school choice before, but you are now, because of the manifestation of this weird politics. And I mentioned that I wasn't, I don't want to say I was against gun rights or anything like that, but I definitely leaned more towards, what common sense gun control, and I didn't want to own any guns. Now I own a bunch, and I'm like, nah, get out of here. Don't take my guns. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've been pushed to that side because the left is scarier and goes against our own drives. For me, safety and security. And I think it's actually similar for you in terms of school choice.
Yeah, I've changed on minor policy type things, but I'd say since I was 20, I don't think my fundamental politics hasn't really changed much, but relative to where the center is, given that the left has sort of gone out
Right.
super far, now I'm just considered centrist or even maybe center right by some people.
I would
Welcome.
say by standard American this generation, my politics are very liberal, at least where liberal used to be. But now liberal today is blindly following far left progressive insanity. And so they call me conservative. And I'm like, I have very few conservative positions. And there are a lot of union Democrats that have historically been pro 2A. So that's not even necessarily, there are blue states that are very much pro Second Amendment. Vermont, for instance, Bernie Sanders used to have a good position on gun control, saying it was an urban versus rural issue. And I was like, that's a brilliant point. That's why I liked him back in the day. Now he's kind of sold out. But the right is not really moving all that much. And they're opening up their tent to liberals who still believe in their same liberal positions. But the far left and whatever liberal is supposed to mean today doesn't represent, in my opinion, the average American. They like to claim America is a progressive country, and it's a lie. They just do clever wordplay. My favorite is the Green New Deal. Here's what they do. This is how polls work. You probably know. Would you support the government investing into research for green technologies to help reduce carbon emissions?
Well, yes, they would.
Absolutely. You are for the Green New Deal. Check. Then they come out and they say 87% were in favor of Green New Deal policies. You see, they reframe the answer different from the question. Of course, they'll say, here's our full, questionnaire, and here's what we asked. But nobody goes in there. Some people do. But then the headline is 87% support the Green New Deal. Why? It's the bias. People see polls, and they assume if most people like it, they'll just say, sure, I'm for it too, because they want to fit in. And that's where we're at. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. So come back to check us out when we go live. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell. And we are also available on all podcast platforms for free if you want to listen to us there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.